How to successfully kill your orchids. Wait, is that right? Ed, which channel are we filming for? Oh, okay, sorry. Let's start again. Every decision you make about caring for your orchid leads to a whole cascade of other decisions that you have to make. Here we'll go through the process that you go through in deciding what's best for your orchid to ensure that you get the maximum out of it. We're going to be repotting the Stanhopea and going through the decision process on what needs to be done to take this further to ensure that it comes right. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. So we can see the Stanhopea's not looking too happy any longer. It's been bad decision making. We've left it in this for far too long. We knew this media was going off and we just left it in there for longer and longer and longer, leaving it till the very last minute. And this is bad decision making. What's happened now is this media is just holding so much moisture that it's beginning to rot all the roots and the whole plant along with it. So it needs to be taken out quickly, removed and repotted. And with Stanhopeas, we know that they like to keep moisture around them all of the time. But they don't want to be wet and soggy like this. They still need that air movement so that the roots can breathe. So now we have to remove it from this hanging basket. As we can see, it's all grown through. We're just going to have to carefully remove it from this hanging basket and repot it. And that's where all the decisions start coming in. We're going to have to decide what media we're going to use, how we're going to mix the medias together, and for that we need to know a little bit about Stanhopeas. Well, we all know Stanhopeas flower from the bottom, so that's one of the reasons that we use these hanging baskets, and we always use something like a coir liner so that those flower spikes can push their way through easily. Make sure it's not too thick that you can almost see through the coir liner to ensure that you're not going to retard the growth of that flower through the liner at all. And we also know that Stanhopeas like water. They like to stay moist. They don't like to dry out terribly much. Because if you start getting all those wrinkly pseudobulbs, they will not flower for you. We have to keep them moist throughout the year. They really don't want that drying period like what you would give your dendrobiums or other orchids. Even though they have these large pseudobulbs, they like to stay moist. Also, they don't like too much sun. You want to put them, and there we go. I'm busy repotting, and we have a flower spike coming out the bottom, so no repotting for this baby today. There we go. There's that flower spike. There we go. As I say, orchid growing is all about making the right decisions at the right time, and the right decision is here, not to repot this yet, but to let that flower grow. We'll get back to this episode another day. So let's not leave the episode there. That was the right decision for that orchid. Now let's look at the Stanhopea instead. This is one of my propagation bowls that I use to put in all those little back bulbs of the Stanhopeas to produce more plants. And this again, the media is well done for now, holding way too much moisture. We can see even the mushrooms are beginning to grow. This also needs to be transplanted. And we're not going to be putting it into a way huge big basket like this, because there's going to be far too much media in it, and it will need to be transplanted sooner than it will outgrow the pot. Take a reasonable size basket for it that it can grow into. Remember, these organic medias is only going to last approximately 2 years, possibly 3 if you're lucky. Stanhopeas do grow quickly, but not quickly enough to fill that up before the media starts to turn. First decision is the size of basket we're going to be using for it. This is also well grown through the sides of the basket, so let's just see how we can get this out without damaging the plant too much. There's a bad decision. Please don't use your secateurs for this. Use pliers or something. Sorry. And here come some other important decisions. How are we going to remove this? Are we going to cut away the wire? Are we going to carefully break apart the plant? So let's look closer and see what needs to be done. So here we can see where it's going to break away. There is some new growth happening here, which is happening right on the top of this new growth here. So it's not going to be a bad decision to just carefully pull these two apart. By removing this section, we're allowing more space for each of those sections to keep growing. Now we can just rotate this out of the basket carefully, and we haven't damaged the basket, so this can be reused, and our plant is still looking good. We have one tiny little offset that came off with the removal, but notice it still has some roots. It will still survive relatively easily. See, it's still got a tiny little back bulb there, so there's enough power in this to keep growing. One of the reasons this is just such a mass of back bulbs altogether is because it was one of the propagation methods we were using. Quite a few back bulbs would have been put into the same pot at the same time, just to allow for them each to take, and obviously quite a few of them did, and they've just rooted themselves all together now. So we do have a Stanhopea video, which I'll link in the description box below. This one, it's just looking at the decisions we need to make while repotting or working with the plants, and understand how each of those decisions affect the following decisions that we need to make. So it really doesn't matter which orchid you're working from or working with, you'll still need to make similar sort of decisions with a similar sort of process involved. So we're just cleaning off all the muck here, just to take away as much of the debris, so there's a smaller likelihood of any infections being passed across. So now this is where the decisions start becoming interesting. Do I want to break this up into smaller pieces, or do I want to plant it as a big clump of pseudobulbs? And all of these are answered with regards to what you have available and what you're working with. What size bark you're using, what other media you want to add into it. With bark this sort of size, I don't want tiny little pieces sitting in my bark, because it's just going to dry out way too quickly, and if they move around, they'll easily break the plant. If I'm looking to plant something this sort of size, this sort of bark chunk is ideal. And if I'm planting with bark, I often like to use perlite in with my bark. But look how fine my perlite is. If I'm using bark this size and I'm using perlite this size, what's going to happen? It's all just going to sink to the bottom, and I'll land up with a perlite layer at the bottom of this, which will hold all the moisture in at the bottom, and that's going to start causing problems. It will block the air movement that I need coming through the basket, and that's not such a good idea. So what am I going to use as opposed to the perlite? Well, there we go, see, it's still coming out. To hold that extra moisture, since these bark pieces are so nice and big, they're firm, they've got lots of air gaps, I'm going to be using some sphagnum moss. This is going to hold lots of moisture. It's going to still allow for that air movement, keeping those bark chunks apart. But in my environment, this sphagnum moss is going to hold probably too much moisture. So I'm going to add some charcoal into the mix as well, just to give it a little bit of an inorganic component. It's going to help clean the water, help reduce the speed at which the bark decomposes, and will help balance out the moisture retention of this sphagnum moss. Those are some of the things you're going to be needing to look at, is what your plant's requirements are with what you have available to work with. Of course, you could always go through and cut your bark up smaller if you've got the time, or if you don't feel it's necessarily and you don't need hundreds and hundreds of plants, we can just pot them up as big as possible using what we have available. So what I'm going to be doing here is doing approximately half of the mix will be the bark alone. Then 1/4 of it will be the charcoal, and the other quarter will be the sphagnum moss. And how do I come up with this sort of mix? Well, we know that Stanhopeas like that moisture. We also putting them in a hanging basket, which is going to allow for air movement through, which will dry the media out quickly. And also, they don't like full sun, so they need to be in a shadier position, which also means they're not going to be drying out as quickly as something in the full sun would. So we need something that's going to hold moisture and something that's going to allow for excess water to drain out quickly, and something that's going to allow for good air movement. So we just have to make sure that we're balancing what we're doing with what the orchid requires. And as I said, each decision you make changes the angle that you have to look at the other decisions. So if you're using a much finer bark with smaller chunks, you're probably not going to be using the sphagnum moss. You'll probably be using something like the perlite that's going to still allow for that air movement but help retain the moisture. Whereas within the finer bark, your sphagnum moss will start filling up all the gaps and probably hold too much moisture while not allowing through that air movement. So you've got to balance everything out as you're working, understanding what your orchid needs. And again, if you're in lower humidity environments, remember you might want to add a little bit extra of that sphagnum moss to help maintain the moisture in and around the plant as evaporation takes place. Also, that's an important decision to make if your temperatures are quite high as well, because the higher your temperatures are, the faster the evaporation is going to take place. So the more sphagnum moss you may have to use. Because remember, these babies don't want to be bone dry. Even during those winter periods when they can seem to go dormant, they still like to be kept with a little bit of moisture. And also remember, the smaller your plant is, the shallower your basket is going to have to be. Because for a smaller plant to push a flower spike through a deep basket like this is going to be almost impossible. Your flower spike will grow a little bit and then just abort because it's not getting anywhere. And here we can see growths on 3 sides of our Stanhopea, and the 4th side doesn't have any new growths coming out. So what we can do is take one of these other pieces that does have a growth coming out that side and add it in over there, and then that will fill up our whole basket. And another reason we're planting the Stanhopea in the center of the basket is because we saw how difficult it was once your Stanhopea starts to grow through the sides of the basket, how difficult it can be to remove. So here at least we're giving it enough space for it to grow for those 2 years before we do the transplant again, and then it's not going to be so traumatic for us or the plant in that repot. And there we go. And then we have all these other separate pieces which I'm not going to try and shove into the same basket again, because as I said, Stanhopeas, if you've got them growing in the right conditions, can grow quite quickly. They can fill up really quickly, and I don't want to cause that same problem of overgrowing the basket again, or of pieces overshadowing others and causing trouble. So you need to look to see what's going to suit the plant the best by understanding its growth habits and the conditions you are growing it in. So always remember, there's not one way that is best. It all is a matter of deciding what you have, what you're working with, and how you're going to use it the best way possible. Because even here we can see in this old potting media that I used, there were macadamia nut shells, there was bark, and you can see that white of the perlite. And you can see the bark was a much finer, thinner bark than what I was using here. So obviously I didn't need to use any sphagnum moss. But it just goes to show each decision you make, that's going to involve a whole line of other decisions to come out with a positive result. As they say, all roads lead to Rome. Just choose one of them. So don't see this as a repotting video. See this as a lesson in critical thinking when it comes to orchids. Ed posts up a lot of educational information in that Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Don't be shy, sign up, become a member, and get all that extra bonus members only info to help you make better informed decisions when it comes to that critical thinking time. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information useful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.